Welcome to the Think Podcast.
I've had this, debate with my fellow Christians as well. And when I read through Genesis, I see it that the earth wasn't created it was created in 3 days, but not 3 days according to, or 7 days, but not 7 days according to us, but 7 days according to God. Because God didn't create time on earth until the fourth day.
No, when you say God didn't create... okay, I don't want to jump in. So what's your...
Time on earth until the fourth day.
Okay, so what's your... Is that just sort of like food for thought, or do you have a question specifically?
So yeah, my question would be I don't know if you ever read into that to see how, when you read through Genesis, he doesn't put the sun and the moon in the sky to signify time for us until the fourth day.
I see. Got it. Okay, yeah, fair question. So would you agree that there's a difference between time and the way we measure time?
Yes.
Okay. So the fact that God doesn't create the sun until day 4 doesn't mean that there wasn't time. I mean, clearly you've got duration happening the first 3 days. Don't neglect the fact too that it also says that there was evening and there was morning. And so God seems to be trying to make it pretty clear that we are talking about literal 24-hour periods, because there's evening and there's morning and there's evening and there's morning. And the pattern stays exactly the same between day 3, 4, 5. It's not, the exact same words are used. The only time you don't have that temporal language, evening and morning, is in regards to the seventh day. And I think that that's important, not because the seventh day wasn't a literal day, because I do think we see that in Exodus, is it Exodus 13 or Exodus 20, where it talks about the Sabbath, God rested on the seventh day, so that day is, it becomes the pattern for Israel to keep the Sabbath. But the reason why the Genesis seventh day is sort of left rhetorically open, like it doesn't say, and that was the end of the seventh day, is because that's going to be very important in Hebrews. The author of Hebrews is going to go back to Genesis and say, see, we're still in that seventh day. That seventh day of God's rest. And he does it theologically to say, we can enter into Christ's rest. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. This is in Hebrews 4. And, the author of Hebrews does that a couple of times. He does that with the Sabbath, and he does it with Melchizedek. He says Melchizedek is a man without genealogy, without father and mother, without death. He lasts forever. Well, Melchizedek was a real man. But rhetorically, he stands for Christ, who didn't, who has existed eternally and always will. The seventh day was a real day, but rhetorically, theologically, it stands for God's rest for his people. But none of that negates the language of Genesis, which is written as a historical account, using what we called, commonplace temporal language, evening and morning. This is not a hill that I die on, but I am firmly convinced that the creation week was literal 7 days. Anytime you have, and I'm not a Hebrew expert. I literally do not even read Hebrew. So don't pin me down on this. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here. But whenever you have the word yom as it's used for day in Genesis, accompanied by a number and a transition like evening and morning, it always means day, 24-hour period. So I don't see how a traditional, grammatical historical reading of Genesis can get you a conclusion other than we're talking about actual days. And even if you want to say it's, days according to God, well, the Apostle Peter says 1,000 years is like a day. So, unless you're going to say like the first 3 days were 3,000 years, and then the last 4 days were, 4 24-hour periods, that doesn't really jive with what God says in Exodus. And then also that doesn't really jive with evolution or, old earth frameworks anyway. So you're kind of like, you'd kind of have to invent your own school of interpretation, I think. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, because I would see it as, because in the first he says he created the evening and the mornings were created, but that was the evenings and the mornings for God.
Well, what does that mean for God to have evening and morning, though?
No, that was his signifying time to us from his perspective. So, like you said, 1,000 years, one day for us is 1,000 years for God. So those 7 days is like 7,000 years.
Well, yeah, but you just said that the fourth day is when God created time on earth. So then wouldn't 4, 5, and 6 and 7 presumably
change? He's still, when he's saying evening and morning were the first day, that is celestial evening and morning. That's evening and morning to God, not to us.
Okay, it's an interesting idea.
So let's say if Adam and Eve were created at the tail end of the 6th day, so like the last 100 years, so they would live through the 6th day into the 7th day.
Yeah, but I mean, that's an interesting idea, but how do you support that biblically? That God has evening and mornings. Like, what does that mean?
Well, it's like we weren't the first creation that God created, so other creations also observe time. Like,
whoa, what do you mean by that? You mean like the animals?
We weren't the first thing that God created. I mean, God created the angels before He created man.
How do you support that biblically?
Well, it talks about it in like Genesis, how the sons of God, and it talks about how they came down from heaven. The book of Genesis is a history of earth, not the history of all the things that God created in the universe.
Oh, I don't know about that, because it starts out by saying in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then it proceeds to tell you how He did it.
Right, but He doesn't say what was created in the heavens. He said He created the heavens, but it doesn't specify what was in the heavens that He created.
Well, we know that He created the heavenly bodies at the same time He created the sun and the moon, correct?
Right.
So, what's your idea, that there was just this big giant void of space and there was nothing in it, or?
No, I was saying that there was other creatures that were created before He created man.
Yeah, I don't know. I used to think that way, and I really the only thing that I can possibly see that maybe points to that is when it talks about the morning stars singing together. At creation, that might be a reference. I think that's in Job. Clearly, I haven't researched that recently, but I don't know. This idea that we're talking about that God has evening and morning, and there's this other. I do think that God does not experience time according to us, but you said yourself it's talking about time on earth.
I mean, even like the angels in heaven right now, they don't experience time how we experience time. There is another time that they're experiencing.
Well, that's an interesting idea, but how would you support that biblically?
Well, time, 24-hour periods, is a earthly time. It's a time that we observe. So how would, let's say, if a being up in heaven would experience time differently than we do?
Well, sure. I mean, in the sense that they wouldn't see the sun rising over their heads. Yeah. But, I don't see anything in scripture that says that an angel experiences duration differently. I mean, maybe they do. It's very possible, but I'm just saying scripture is silent on that. I've given a lot of thought to God's relationship to time. And basically, I think we're looking at two separate questions. On the one hand, does God experience time differently than us? Yeah, He does. I think scripture is clear on that. On the other hand, can you do a faithful genre analysis of Genesis, chapter 1, chapter 2, and come to a conclusion that at one point it's speaking sort of poetically or apocalyptically, and then at some point it changes to like actual historical earthbound history? I haven't seen anybody be able to draw that line. I wouldn't know where to draw that line.
It says right here, it says, and God created the light day and the darkness night. In the evening and morning were the first day.
Where is that? That's Genesis 1.
Genesis 1:5.
Okay.
So that's before he created the sun and the moon and gave us as a time for us to observe days and years and months.
Yes,
this day and this night,
but those
different than the day and night that were created for us.
Well, no, that doesn't necessarily follow, because the great lights, the greater light. So I'm looking at verse 16. The greater light to rule over the day, and the lesser light to rule over the night, as well as the stars.
Right, but that's the third day, or the fourth day.
Yeah, correct. So in verse 14, then, when it says, they will serve as signs for seasons and for days and years. A simple reading of that just means exactly what it says. That, how do we tell what, like the lunar calendar.
Right, but those are signs and seasons for us. But then when you look at the first day, it says day, he created day and night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the light is called day, and the darkness is called night.
Fourth day. So the day and the night that was created is not the same day and night that was created on the fourth day.
No, so where it says God called light day, he's not calling the light a 24-hour period. That would be an example of the word day being used not as a 24-hour period. It's daylight. It's look outside. Is it day or night? Oh, it's day. We don't, but that doesn't tell me what day it is or how long the day lasts. That just means there's a difference between day and night. There's darkness and light. There's day and night. It's just God creating order in the cosmos. That doesn't mean, that he's not talking about some period of time that's non-24 hours. It's just talking about daylight and darkness is night. I mean, that's just.
Yeah, but then that's why he specifies in the next verse, it says evening and morning were the first day.
Right.
So it correlates with the previous verse, showing that the evening and morning were the first day that were created.
Well, no, that doesn't exactly coordinate, because he says light, day, darkness, night, and there was evening and there was morning. He doesn't say, it's not a recapitulation of what he just said. He doesn't say, and there was daylight, or, there was morning and evening, which would be a direct, recapitulation. He called the light day, the darkness night, there was morning, and there was evening. Instead, it's flipped. There was evening and there was morning. So I read that and I see we're talking about a boundary marker that is, yes, marked by a transition into darkness and then light, but we're talking about something that is characteristic of a 24-hour period, something that happens every 24 hours. And I think that that's supported by the fact that you don't see any other language used for any other day in the creation week. So like if day 6 is a 24-hour period, then day 1 has to be, and if day 7 is a 24-hour period, which Exodus seems to say that it is, when it says God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, I don't see how you avoid the conclusion that God's talking about an actual week, 7 actual days. Otherwise, what does it mean that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th? And therefore Israel's supposed to work 6 days and rest on the 7th. If that's the principle, then that would mean Israel was supposed to work for 6,000 years and then rest on the 7,000 years.
He gave us time on the fourth day, but the days and nights that he was referring to was the celestial time period.
Yeah, I think you're importing that in. I mean, respectfully,
that's how I've jived with the old Earth, new Earth.
Oh, I see.
That I don't see it as 24-hour periods according to us, but actual time periods according to God.
Sure. So you might really enjoy the work of Hugh Ross and Reasons to Believe. He talks about, I don't know if you would fully line up with him, but you'd be more in line with him than like a creation evolutionist. I mean, what do they call themselves? Evolutionary creationist, or
I don't believe in evolution at all. I mean, I believe that everything was created. Well,
so real quick.
It's just different for me.
Yeah, I don't go there with you, Hogan. I don't think the biblical evidence supports it. And I will say, I don't think that the geological evidence is there for an old Earth. I mean, that's a whole separate issue. We've been talking about just, interpretation of Genesis 1. But if we want to talk about the actual scientific evidence, I do not think, in any way, shape, or form that the archaeological evidence supports an old Earth, an Earth older than 4,000 years. 6,000 years. So that's a whole separate question, but maybe we can talk about it another time.
Okay. All right. Hey, thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man.